No one warns you about what happens after the funeral. When the flowers dry, the calls stop, and the house grows unbearably quiet. You assume one thing will remain: family. You believe grief will unite everyone, that shared loss will soften hearts. But that belief is often the most expensive mistake of all. This is not just a story about money. It's an unfair inheritance story, rooted in family betrayal, where grief becomes an opportunity and silence becomes a weapon. What looks like love in public slowly reveals itself as calculation behind closed doors. And that's when greedy heirs show their true faces. The cruel truth is this: real inheritance revenge rarely starts with shouting, lawsuits, or dramatic confrontations. It starts with something far more dangerous: acceptance. A calm, okay. A quiet smile. A decision that looks like surrender, as disposable by the very people. If you've ever been claimed to love you, this story will hit close to home, because the most devastating plot twist doesn't come from fighting back. It comes from giving them exactly what they asked for and letting them discover the cost too late. Her husband's death didn't arrive gently. It shattered everything at once. One day there were routines, shared plans, and a sense of direction. The next, there was only silence. The house felt too big, the nights unbearably long, and every decision felt heavier than it should. In moments like this, no one thinks about inheritance. You think about surviving grief. And that vulnerability is where every great family drama begins. The funeral was full. Hugs lingered longer than usual. Voices softened. Promises were made. The children spoke about unity, about staying together. It sounded sincere. Relatives repeated the almost same phrase. Protective. Family but comes many first. Stories of family betrayal begin exactly this way, wrapped in sympathy and false solidarity. In the early days of mourning, she believed unity would happen naturally. After all, everyone had lost something. Right, so she lowered her guard. She didn't question documents. She didn't push uncomfortable conversations. Grief has a way of making trust feel safe, even when it isn't. As many timeless books warn, emotional pain is the worst moment to assume people will act fairly. While she cried alone in the bedroom, others were already calculating in silence. Her pain was genuine. Their urgency was strategic. That contrast is brutal, yet painfully common in stories involving greedy heirs. Where affection lasts when you only as long as it's useful, had an expiration the most painful date. Realization, the expectation of family unity, began to crack in subtle ways. Meetings she wasn't invited to, conversations that stopped when she entered the room, shared looks that said more than words ever could. To someone drowning in grief, these signs are easy to dismiss, but they are classic warnings that something important is being decided without you. Here's a quiet lesson hidden in moments like this. Grief clouds memory, details fade, promises blur. That's how an unfair inheritance story quietly writes itself, not through open conflict, but through silence, distraction, and emotional exhaustion. By the time the truth surfaces, the damage often feels irreversible. She believed the worst pain had already passed. Losing her husband felt like the deepest wound life could deliver. What she didn't realize was that humiliation can hurt just as deeply, where the audience especially when it comes because from almost everyone has trusted the wrong people at the wrong time. The stage was set. Grief opened the door. Trust held it wide open. What seemed like a tragic chapter of life was quietly becoming the foundation for a calculated act of inheritance revenge, one that would unfold without shouting, without chaos, and without mercy. The truth didn't arrive all at once. It surfaced in fragments: a conversation overheard, a document mentioned too casually, a tone that felt colder than before. Slowly, she realized the family she trusted wasn't grieving the same way she was. While she was still processing loss, they had already moved on to ownership. It became clear that the children were no longer acting like family. They were acting like claimants. Questions about assets replaced concern for her well-being. Their kindness shifted into efficiency. This wasn't support, it was positioning. And in that moment, the mask slipped just enough to reveal the first signs of greedy heirs. Then came the discovery that changed everything. The inheritance wasn't just unfair, it was calculated. Properties, savings, and protections had been quietly redirected. What remained for her wasn't security, but responsibility. Bills, debts, maintenance. She was left holding the weight, while they took the reward. A textbook unfair inheritance story, unfolding in real time. The shock wasn't just financial, it was emotional. She wasn't angry yet, she was stunned. Betrayal hits differently when it comes wrapped in calm voices and legal language. This wasn't a loud confrontation. This was family betrayal delivered with polite smiles and practiced indifference. When she asked questions, the responses were short and rehearsed. "That's just how it is. Dad wanted it this way. We're only following the documents." No empathy, no hesitation, just cold certainty. In that moment, she understood something painful. They weren't conflicted about this at all. Worse than the loss itself was the realization that she was expected to accept it quietly, to be grateful for scraps, to absorb the damage without protest. This is how humiliation often works, not through insults, but through dismissal, through the assumption that you won't fight back. This is where many people break, where anger explodes or despair takes over. But she did neither. Instead, something else happened, something far more dangerous. She stopped explaining herself. She stopped defending her position. Silence replaced emotion, and that silence made the others careless, because, while they believed they had already won, they failed to notice the shift. The betrayal wasn't the end of the story, it was the trigger. What they saw as victory was only the opening move in a quiet, deliberate act of inheritance revenge that was just beginning to take shape. It didn't happen in a single dramatic scene. There was no shouting, no raised voices, no public confrontation. The humiliation arrived quietly, in the way conversations ended abruptly, in the way decisions were announced instead of discussed. That's when she fully understood she hadn't just been excluded. She had been replaced. She realized she'd been misled from the very beginning. Trust had been used against her, strategically and without remorse. Every smile at the funeral, every promise of unity now felt rehearsed. This wasn't confusion or misunderstanding. It was deliberate family betrayal, carefully disguised as normal procedure. The heirs' reactions were disturbingly calm. No guilt, no discomfort, just efficiency. To them, this wasn't personal, it was transactional. And that coldness cut deeper than anger ever could. It confirmed what she had begun to suspect. She felt empathy something worse than anger, disposability. As if her role in the family had expired the moment the paperwork was finalized. This is the quiet cruelty of greedy heirs. They don't need to humiliate you publicly. They let the system do it for them. She watched how quickly they moved on. Discussions about renovations, future investments, and next steps continued as if nothing had happened. Meanwhile, she was left absorbing the emotional damage alone. That contrast made the injustice impossible to ignore. Many people would have confronted them right then, demanded explanations, threatened legal action. She didn't, not because she was weak, but because she was paying attention. Pain sharpened her awareness. Silence became her shield. This was the moment where something shifted internally. Not rage, not despair, clarity. She understood that arguing now would only confirm their assumptions about her. They believed she had no leverage, and she decided not to correct them, because humiliation, when endured without reaction, creates overconfidence in others. They stopped being cautious. They stopped watching her, and in that blind spot, the foundation was laid for a reversal they would never see coming, one that would turn this unfair inheritance story into a calculated act of inheritance revenge. Everyone assumed the next step would be a fight, accusations, lawyers, emotional breakdowns. That's what they were waiting for. Instead, she did something that confused them completely. She agreed. No raised voice, no resistance, just a calm acceptance that felt out of place. "I understand," she said. "If that's what you want, I won't stand in the way." The words landed softly, but their impact was immediate. Relief spread across their faces. To them, this wasn't strength, it was surrender. And that misinterpretation was their first real mistake. By choosing not to argue, she removed their sense of threat. They stopped preparing defenses, stopped double-checking details. When people believe they've already won, they grow careless. And carelessness is fertile ground for reversal. What they didn't realize was that acceptance doesn't always mean agreement. Sometimes it's strategy. Sometimes it's patience. Her decision wasn't emotional. It was precise. She wasn't giving up. She was giving them space to expose themselves. "I'll give you exactly what you want," she told them. The sentence sounded harmless, generous even. They heard it as closure, but in reality, it was a promise, and a warning they were too confident to notice. From that moment on, everything changed quietly. She listened more, spoke less, observed how they rushed forward without hesitation. Silence became her greatest advantage, while their certainty blinded them to the risk unfolding right in front of them. This is where most stories of inheritance revenge truly begin, not with anger, but with control, with the ability to let others underestimate you, with the discipline to wait while they rush. And as they celebrated what they believed was an effortless victory, a plan began to form slowly, carefully, and entirely within the rules. They thought the story was ending. In truth, it had just crossed the point of no return. The lawyer didn't enter the story dramatically. No grand speeches, no courtroom tension. He appeared quietly, at exactly the right moment. While the heirs believed everything was settled, he began reviewing details they had dismissed as insignificant. That was their second mistake. But they do require attention, and attention is something greedy heirs often lack once they think they've secured their win. Clauses were skimmed, responsibilities were ignored, obligations were assumed to belong to someone else. That assumption would soon become costly. The inheritance looked like a victory on the surface: assets, properties, control. But buried beneath that appearance were conditions, maintenance requirements, tax liabilities, debt transfers, legal timelines, details designed to protect the original owner, not reward impatience. What the heirs saw as generosity was actually balance. What they dismissed as minor paperwork was the structure holding everything together. The lawyer explained calmly, "Ownership without responsibility is an illusion, and illusions don't survive legal reality." The trap wasn't aggressive. It wasn't unethical. It was entirely legitimate. She hadn't added anything. She hadn't altered a word. She simply allowed the system to function exactly as it was written. This is the elegance of true inheritance revenge, letting rules do the work. While the heirs rushed forward, she slowed down. While they celebrated, she prepared. Every signature they had rushed through now worked against them. Every obligation they ignored was now exclusively theirs. This is the moment power quietly changes hands, not through confrontation, but through comprehension. The lawyer didn't fight for her. He clarified reality. And reality, once understood, couldn't be undone. By the time the heirs realized something was wrong, it was already too late. The victory they thought they had secured was structurally unstable, and the foundation they ignored was about to collapse under its own weight. The realization didn't come all at once. It started with confusion, unexpected bills, legal notices, deadlines they hadn't planned for. What once felt like a clean victory suddenly became complicated. The confidence they carried began to fracture. They went back to the documents, this time reading every line. That's when panic replaced arrogance. The assets they rushed to claim came bundled with obligations they had ignored. Taxes, debts, maintenance costs, responsibilities that could no longer be transferred or avoided. What looked like wealth was actually weight. What felt like power was now pressure. The inheritance they believed they had won wasn't a reward. It was a test, and they had failed to prepare for it. In that moment, the truth became undeniable. They had lost, not because someone tricked them, but because their greed blinded them. The system hadn't betrayed them. They had betrayed themselves. A classic unfair inheritance story, now flipped upside down. The shock was visible. Conversations turned tense. Voices rose. Accusations started flying. But there was no one left to blame. The victory they had celebrated was now irreversible, locked in by their own signatures. Meanwhile, she remained calm, not triumphant, not cruel, just steady. She didn't need to explain anything. The documents spoke for her. This is the quiet satisfaction of inheritance revenge, justice without spectacle. The heirs finally understood what had happened. Giving them exactly what they wanted had been the worst possible outcome. The reversal was complete. Power had shifted without a single argument, as the most decisive move of all. And in that realization, everything they thought they controlled slipped permanently out of their hands. The regret didn't arrive with apologies. It arrived with silence. Days passed without celebration, without confidence, without certainty. The heirs who once moved quickly now hesitated, unsure of their next step. Then came the messages. Short at first, careful, almost polite. "We need to talk. There's been a misunderstanding. Let's clear things up." Desperation has a way of disguising itself as reason. They reached out not to reconnect, but to escape the consequences. The same people who dismissed her concerns now needed her cooperation. Power had shifted completely, and they felt it. She didn't rush to respond. Silence, once used against her, now worked in her favor. Every unanswered message reinforced the new reality. Access to her was no longer guaranteed. This is the moment when greedy heirs realize the true cost of their actions. Not just financial loss, but the collapse of control. They had everything on paper and nothing in practice. Attempts to soften the past followed, rewritten memories, selective regret, familiar tactics designed to trigger guilt. But guilt only works when the balance of power allows it. There was no celebration in their downfall, only clarity. She had nothing left to prove and nothing left to explain. The story had already spoken for itself. In the end, the loudest lesson wasn't spoken aloud. It lived in the silence they couldn't escape. The final confirmation that the reversal was complete and irreversible. Not every revenge needs to be loud. Not every victory requires confrontation. Some of the most powerful reversals happen quietly, without raised voices or public scenes. Only patience and precision. In stories of family betrayal, people expect justice to look dramatic, but real justice often looks calm. It looks like understanding the system better than those who try to exploit it. Giving people exactly what they want can be the most devastating consequence of all, especially when desire is driven by greed rather than foresight. This is how greedy heirs defeat themselves. This unfair inheritance story didn't end with punishment. It ended with balance. The outcome wasn't cruelty. It was inevitability. Rules applied as written. Choices honored as made. The lesson here isn't about money. It's about restraint. About knowing when silence is stronger than argument. About trusting timing over impulse. True inheritance revenge doesn't seek applause. It seeks closure. And closure doesn't require permission from those who wronged you. If there's one thing to remember, it's this: underestimation is a gift. When others believe you've lost, they stop watching. And that's when power quietly returns to where it belongs. Sometimes, the worst punishment isn't what you take away, it's what you allow them to keep. And the cost of that choice stays with them long after the story ends.